Hello, Config 2023! Woo! I'm Mahika. I'm a PM here at Figma, and I'm so excited to be your host for this afternoon. My favorite part of Figma has always been the community. Last year, I had the opportunity to host our 24-hour virtual config, but I cannot emphasize how excited I am to be here with you all in real life today, and to have thousands of Figmates from across the world here together. OK, let's get a poll of where people are from. Raise your hand if you came from the Bay, SF, etc. Woo! So many of you. OK, raise your hand if you came from anywhere else in the continental US. Wow, a lot of people traveling. Raise your hand if you think you traveled furthest to be here today. OK, where are you from? London. Wow. OK, who else? Belgium. Oh my God. Brazil. Whoa. OK, can we get a round of applause for everyone who flew here across these oceans? Alrighty. For this next session, I cannot wait to introduce Yuki Yamashita, Chief Product Officer at Figma, and Shishir Mehrotra, CEO of Coda. Now, Yuki has been one of my most influential product mentors, and Shashir has been one of Yuki's most influential product mentors. So it's basically like Shashir is my grand mentor. I feel very honored to be introducing them both today. Some fun facts about this duo. Yuki and Shashir have known each other for quite some time already. They both speak a lot about product culture and product building. In fact, Shashir is actually currently writing a book called The Rituals of Great Teams. You should all buy it when it comes out. When Yuki worked at Uber, he was Shashir's first customer of Coda, and Shashir at Coda was actually Figma's first customer. So there's a nice, interesting loop there. Here to talk about the habits and rituals that drive team culture and share inspiring real-life examples from Figma, Coda, and many more inspiring companies. Please welcome to the stage Yuki and Shashir.
I get this one.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I actually want to start with a story from back in 2015 when I first started at Uber. And it was just 1 week into my job, and I got this email from Jeff Holden, our Chief Product Officer at the time. And it was a simple question mark. And he was forwarding an email from a random customer who had a terrible pickup experience at SFO Airport. And my first reaction was, well, it's just one customer, right? And what am I really supposed to do? But of course, I was kind of intimidated by Jeff. So I talked to one of my coworkers, what am I supposed to do with this? And their eyes opened up wide, and they're like, you've got to drop everything you're doing right now and investigate what on earth happened to this customer, get back to Jeff, get back to the customer. And so I did exactly that. I looked at our trip logs, started to sift through our analytics, and understand what exactly happened. And I wrote this multi-page doc with screenshots of maps, and just to explain what on earth happened, and logged a bunch of bugs along the way as well. Wrote back to Jeff, wrote back to the customer, and by the end of the day, it was super late, I was exhausted, and needless to say, it was the most stressful onboarding experience possible. But later, I learned that there's an origin story to this question mark, and it was a tradition that he had actually borrowed from his boss, another Jeff Bezos of Amazon. And Bezos famously forwarded these emails from customers with a single question mark to his reports, and they forwarded it to their reports, and so on and so forth. And the expectation was exactly the same, that you drop everything you're doing and right that wrong. And sometimes if you wrote a mediocre response back, well, you got 2 question marks. And I asked, well, what happens with 2 question marks? And they just said, you don't want to know. And later I asked, why does Bezos do this? And it became really clear to me when I looked at Amazon's company values. They publish it, and the very first one is customer obsession. And so behind this question mark, right, was this idea that no customer's feedback was too small to ignore. Right? The CEO was paying attention and expected everyone to drop everything they're doing and really attend to it. And I'm sure all of you can agree, using Amazon and their products, they really care about the end customer experience. And so it was really fascinating to me that a single question mark could single-handedly encapsulate the ethos of a company's culture in a product. And it started to make me wonder, do other great companies have a similar kind of secret that embodies their unique way of working? And I had this big aha moment when I was talking to my friend and mentor, Shashir, who I work together at YouTube with, and is currently the CEO and co-founder of Coda. And as Mihika mentioned, is writing a book revolving around the topic of rituals. And that, I realized, was the missing label. Rituals are the thing that codify the unique ways of working, a company's special culture, and rituals are just really interesting. So I actually invited Shashir to give a talk with me. I promised him I'd make all the slides. And together, today, we're going to spend some time exploring the concept of rituals and why they're completely game-changing for the best teams. So Shashir, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Definitely a big experiment to do a talk like this. First time we're doing it, so be patient with us, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, so before we get too far, let's define terms. What is a ritual?
Okay, so this story starts with a conversation with a friend and mentor of mine, a guy named Bing Gordon. If people don't know Bing, he was the chief creative officer at Electronic Arts. He's now a pretty famous investor, Amazon, Zynga, many great companies. I sat on a board of a startup with him, and one day he asked the CEO this question. He said, "What are your golden rituals?" CEO naturally responded, "What the hell is a golden ritual?" And Bing explained. He said, every great company has a small list of golden rituals, and in his mind, they have 3 key rules. Number 1, they're named. Number 2, every employee knows them by their first Friday. And number 3, they're templated. And Bing has an immediate list of rituals that he talks about. Amazon has 6-pagers. They have question marks, two pizza teams. Google does things like OKRs, TGIF. Salesforce does V2MOM. And his provocation to the CEO was, think as much about your rituals as you think about building your product and your business.
So how did this exactly turn into a book?
Yeah, so I got kind of obsessed with this idea. Started talking about it on a bunch of podcasts, talking about it with friends, and people started sending me interesting rituals. And I started collecting them up, and then the pandemic happened. And we're all trapped in our houses, and I thought it might be a lot of fun to host a series of dinners. So every 2 weeks, I'd get somewhere between 5 and 20 interesting people together and just have them share their rituals with each other. And over the course of the last 3 years, ended up assembling a list of over 1,000 great rituals from amazing teams and companies. And somewhere along the way, someone convinced me I should turn it into a book, and so we've been working on that now, hoping to publish that next year.
And as a fun side note, I think I was at the very first one. Yeah, I was on Zoom. All right, so what did you learn with these conversations?
So learned many things, met all these really interesting people, obviously learned about lots of rituals, but probably the most interesting one came from, or the most interesting idea came from this fellow Dharmesh Shah. He's the the co-founder and CTO of HubSpot. And he was really excited to come to the dinner, and he was talking about how rituals are so exciting to him and so meaningful to him because of this belief he has. And he explained it as a company, we build 2 products. We build one product for our customers, and we build another product for our employees. And his view is that if you ask people to name that second product, they would call it culture. But if you ask them to describe how it works in practice, they would tell you about their rituals. And you talk about how the best companies put as much thought into their rituals as they put into their first product.
And I think this is super relevant to this group, right? Because everyone here already plays a huge role in designing their products. And so my main goal for this talk is to convince you that designing your rituals, you should approach designing your rituals like you design your products. And so in order to do that, we thought we'd share some of our favorite rituals. And so we started sifting through the 1,000+ rituals that Shashir has collected over time, rituals about planning, rituals about meetings and personal productivity, and started to wonder how to narrow it down lest we end up here for 10 hours. And I came across this visual, which I thought was really interesting, and I noticed, Shashir, you organized a bunch of rituals under this visualization.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites as well. It was a fun one Yuki picked out. It comes from a woman named Elise Keith. She's the founder of Lucid Meetings. So Lucid Meetings is an organization dedicated to helping teams run better meetings. They get hired by companies, agencies, governments, and they become really students and teachers of the craft of running great meetings. So Elise and I spent a bunch of time trying to come up with a taxonomy for meetings. So we took all the different meeting types we could come up with, and we slotted them into 3 buckets, the 3 that are listed here. And we actually spent a long time coming up with the shape for each one, so that each shape conveys a little bit of meaning. So give you a quick version of this. The first bucket of meetings are called cadence meetings. So you can picture, your staff meeting, your stand-up, your project syncs. They're represented by a circle. And it's a circle because it's a natural cycle. You set goals, you execute, you reflect. They're also circles because they tend to be recurring with the same group of people over and over again. And like a circle, they're intended to keep things rolling, keep things moving forward. So the second group of meetings are called catalyst meetings. And for these, you could picture your decision-making forums, your product reviews, your design crits. Those are all meetings that could be represented by a diamond. We think about a diamond because it opens and closes, so it's sort of opening spaces and closing down to a decision. They're spiky. They're direction changing, can serve as a catalyst for making progress. And it's also a diamond. You have too many of them, you'll probably burn out. The third bucket we call context meetings. There's a really wide variety of context meetings. You could think of everything from all hands to offsites to new hire orientation, one-on-ones. They're a square because we think of them as a foundation. That's what you can build on. They establish context, knowledge, insight, connection. This category is particularly easy to forget, but my view is that these are the foundation that you build everything else on. Another way to think about these 3 types of meetings is the test. Was it an effective meeting or not? So for a cadence meeting, the test is, are we on track for the goals we set? For a catalyst meeting, they tend to be about making a decision. So generally, the test is, did we get an answer to our question? And for context meetings, the test is, did we come away better enabled to do our job? I think that you can slot every type of meeting into these 3 buckets, and it's really important to have a healthy mix across the 3.
So today, we're going to actually use this lens to organize the rituals that we're going to talk about. And I know meetings don't sound particularly exciting, but actually, some of the most interesting rituals come alive in this category. So with that, let's get into it.
OK, so we're going to start by talking about cadence meetings. And I'll start with the story of this gentleman, JFK, who made a provocation in 1961 that we were going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Really bold statement, motivated an entire country to go work on this initiative. And now think about what he did next. How did he make sure that we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade? He scheduled a weekly meeting with the head of NASA. That is a classic cadence meeting. Right? So cadence meetings are about keeping things rolling, your stand-up, your staff meeting, and so on. And they tend to be really common. So there's a lot of great rituals that come out of these cadence meetings. One of our discussions I had was with a group of about 50 people where we ended up 50 people from 50 different companies. And I asked them to describe what their cadence meetings feel like. And their natural responses were things like this. These meetings are boring, they're a chore, they feel inhuman. And probably the worst one is they feel like something I have to attend instead of want to attend. But then when I spent time with teams that had really worked on their rituals, they tended to have some answer for how they'd avoided one of these fates. So lots of different examples to pick from. Yuki, which one should we start with?
All right, so I want to start with Zapier's weekly leadership meeting. And they have an interesting ritual. Zapier actually is an OG distributed company. They were distributed before being distributed was cool. And they had a doc that they sent out before the leadership meetings, about 2 days before, that looks something like this. And they ask each leader to give an update on how they're feeling, why they're feeling that way, what's top of mind for them. And when the actual meeting happens, there's a silent reading of 10 minutes at the very beginning. And what happens in these 10 minutes is what's interesting. People start to comment on each other's updates and bullets, and entire conversations unfold in the margins of the doc. And by the time the 10 minutes is over, people have already talked about a bunch of things that they're interested in talking about, and the topics that remained were the ones that people wanted to talk about synchronously together. And so one of the things that it did was take this really single-threaded conversation and made it multi-threaded so people can have a bunch of different conversations and just participate in the conversations they were interested in, which made the meeting much more efficient. And silent readings like these are huge at Figma as well. So when I started at Figma, we had this meeting called the coordinator meeting, and we asked every team lead to come in and give updates on their projects. And we called it the coordinator meeting to make it deliberately sound boring. And the only problem, so that there's no FOMO, right? Like we wanted to keep the group small, but the problem was it was boring. I don't know if you are familiar with computer science, but it had this problem of having the complexity of O of n, which means that as you add more teams, as you add more projects, the meeting just became longer and longer and longer. So we actually switched up the format. We switched it to a silent reading where we read all the updates in the beginning, 10 minutes, and we added 2 features. One was this button in Coda where you could raise your hand. And if you raised your hand on that particular update, that meant that we would talk about it after the silent read. The other was this like button, basically, to express a little bit of love and excitement towards that update. And when I implemented this like button, I actually inadvertently introduced a bug. I meant it to work kind of like an Instagram heart, where you like it, unlike it. But actually, when you clicked it once again, it just started to increment the count. So people start to inflate the count and add 60 likes to their own updates or to other, to some of their friends' updates. But it was a really fun way to express this love, and I thought it was uniquely Figma as well. And this ethos remains for meetings that we run on FigJam as well. And people are showering updates with love and +1s and heart stickers, which is really awesome to see.
So I love both those examples. Both of them have a common theme of shifting from single-threaded to multi-threaded meetings. This idea of single-threaded, multi-threaded meetings is something I learned a lot about from Reid Hoffman. So Reid hosts these really amazing dinners, and when he sends an invite out, he makes clear what the topic is, and is it going to be single-threaded or multi-threaded. And he explains what that means. So a single-threaded dinner, you can kind of picture that. There's going to be one topic. Everybody talks about one thing. If the topic changes, it changes for everybody. There's no sort of side conversation. And many of our meetings default to being single-threaded meetings. Multi-threaded meetings are the opposite. So you can picture a happy hour, or what's going to happen here when this talk is over and everybody starts milling around. Little groups form, lots of topics happen at once. Those groups kind of grow and disintegrate on their own volition. And so we had this idea at YouTube that turned into one of my favorite rituals there of could we recreate that level of multi-threaded meeting in the work environment. So we called this meeting Bullpen, and it was an agenda-less meeting. 90 minutes, everybody's in one room, and there's no agenda. You can sit and work, but the only rule was that you had to stay. And what would naturally happen is lots and lots of discussions would emerge. It was a really effective meeting. It was a great sponge for those 5-minute catch-ups that would have otherwise been a single-threaded discussion, boring most of the room. It also got rid of a whole bunch of those ad hoc meetings that are impossible to schedule and fill our calendars. And it was so popular that we actually canceled a bunch of our other meetings and started doing this meeting multiple times a week. And it actually got replicated across lots of teams across Google as well. But when I started Coda, we had a challenge. We decided to start Coda as a distributed team. And you can't sort of replicate the exact same feeling of being in one room when you're all distributed. So we decided to do it a little bit differently. This is how we run it now. So people come in, they list their topics, and they say who they need. These are all the attendees, and roughly how long they're going to need them for. There's a little formula that calculates whether or not there's a conflict, so you can kind of move around topics a little bit, and you get assigned a breakout room, and everybody splits up. So it's a sort of similar virtual version of that multi-threaded meeting. And because it's in a table, we've actually been able to measure the impact over time. So this is a meeting we had last week, and we got through about 30 topics in an hour. And I've never seen a single-threaded meeting get through anywhere near that number of topics.
I love that. And there's another way of taking a lot of topics and fitting it into a single meeting. And I want to talk about a ritual that David Singleton, CTO of Stripe, who you heard from yesterday, brought into Stripe. So he runs these things called ops reviews. And basically what they do is they go through all the incidents that happened that week and go through some postmortems. And there are a wide range of issues, tiny blips, larger issues. But the idea is there's not enough time to go through the postmortems of every single incident in a week. So they actually spin the wheel and pick a random incident to go into. And the impact of this is they still get to have this single-threaded conversation about the given incident, so they can go deep in it and really discuss it. But the impact is multi-threaded because everyone's totally prepared to have that conversation, and that preparation is what actually matters. And I think the second impact is actually that it really signals how important it is to take every incident seriously. So I kind of think of this similar to Stripe's version of the question mark that we talked about that Jeff Bezos has at Amazon and Jeff Holden introduced to Uber, right? This obsession over their customer experience and this insane expectation around reliability from customers.
Okay, so my next example is one that took the same spin the wheel idea, but in a completely different direction. It's one of my favorite rituals from Arianna Huffington. It's called Reset. And I'll just start playing her Reset so you can get a sense for this. So most of you probably know Arianna as someone who changed journalism with the Huffington Post, but she started a new company. It's called Thrive, and it's based on a bunch of research she did on neuroscience and brain chemistry on the idea that you can completely change how your brain is thinking about a topic in about 60 seconds. So she has everybody build a reset like this. It's a video, and the first thing you'll notice, it's a breathing exercise. Inhale, exhale, but it's set to a personal backdrop. So those are pictures of her kids, videos of her hometown in Greece, quotes that she loves, all things that can sort of center her. And she can use it start of a day, end of a day, stressful moments. But what she did is she took this ritual and brought it into the team by mimicking something she heard about from Stripe, from the spin the wheel ritual. And they start every meeting by spinning a wheel, picking a random person, and playing their reset. So a couple things happen when you do that. First off, you get a team meditation exercise to start every meeting, which is really important as a cultural value for what Thrive does and what they want to offer to their customers. But the other thing you get is you get human connection. It's a little bit like the infinite hearts from Figma, where it's just getting people to be a little bit closer together. You're going to sit and watch pictures, videos, music from somebody else, and you're that much closer to being able to understand them and work with them. Okay, so we went through a few different Cadence rituals from some amazing people and companies. So as you think about takeaways here, first off, remember, Cadence meetings are about keeping things rolling. So as you think about those meetings, how do you keep a team moving forward? Some of you might focus on efficiency. Maybe there's a way to be more asynchronous, more multi-threaded, like how Zapier did, or how the bullpen worked. Sometimes it can work to be intentionally random, like spin the wheel from Stripe. And I would encourage you to think about how to make these meetings feel a little bit more human, because they often aren't. And you can do that in little ways, like how the Infinite Hearts did it, or you can do it in much larger ways, things like starting a meeting with a reset.
All right, so whereas Cadence meetings are a way to keep projects and teams rolling, Catalyst meetings are focused on a particular topic, a decision that needs to be made, or a big question that needs to be explored more deeply. And the first thing you might be wondering is, well, why is this different from a Cadence meeting, right? Why can't you just make decisions at your staff meeting or at your team stand-up, right? Seems perfectly reasonable to do that. But the biggest problem with that is often it just has the wrong people, right? When you're trying to make a product decision, maybe the entire exec team doesn't need to be there. Or more likely, the people who actually have and understand the nuance, those are the people who should be in those meetings. And so what we've found is that the best teams actually have a separate forum for decision making so that they can have the correct audience and also tailor the format to make decision making as efficient as possible for that topic. So there's a separate decision-making forum. What happens next? How do you actually get this meeting started? And I think the most important thing is to actually frame what you're talking about, right? And one of the things we noticed is that a lot of teams actually have rituals around this, and specifically, they like to make docs to standardize these decisions. So the most famous example of this is the Amazon PR FAQ, press release and FAQ doc. And at Amazon, what happens is before a single line of code is written, or even you go into Figma to design anything, you actually write a press release at the very beginning. And the idea is that people read the press release and the FAQs associated with it and ask the question, will a customer reading this be compelled? Would they actually want to try this product? And if not, why are you even building it, right? And in so doing, they're forcing themselves to think about the customer's point of view. And what I like about it is it's actually working backwards. Oftentimes, these press releases and FAQs are written at the very end. And by that time, it's too late to change what you're building. And this is a really iconic way to frame a great Catalyst meeting. And it's mimicked by other companies like Square's Spade template or Zoom's root cause reasoning write-up. And you can learn more about that in Shashir's book. But the most important thing to remember is that as you form your distinct Catalyst forum, there are these interesting templates that you can create to help people make decisions.
All right, so great Catalyst meetings have a decision doc framework to try to help you frame decisions. The next ritual I want to talk about is a YouTube favorite for how to frame great questions. We call this eigenquestions. And the story starts with the discussion we had in 2009 that we referred to as the modern family question. So when I got there, this was in every single staff meeting, top topic to talk about what to do when people search for Modern Family. It was one of the top 5 search queries every single day. And it was obvious why. It was the #1 show on TV in 2009, but there was one big problem. We didn't have Modern Family on YouTube. Now, ABC.com had decided to put every episode of Modern Family online for free. And I know these days we take that for granted, but in 2009, that wasn't a thing people did. It was a very aggressive move by ABC. So this led to the question, should we link out to ABC.com, or more generally, should we link out to other sites on YouTube search results? And the team divided in half. Half the team said, of course we should. We're owned by Google now. Do right by the user, get them the right answer, just link out. And the other half of the team was worried that if we did that, we would lose our chance to be able to host that content directly on YouTube. Very polarizing question. So meeting after meeting, we couldn't answer this question. We finally decided we're going to have an offsite. We're going to spend all day, and we're going to figure out an answer to this link out question. And I got the responsibility to try to collect everybody's opinions and frame the discussion so we could get to an answer. The night before the offsite, I happened to be reading a write-up from a different team at Google, from the Google shopping team. And they were investigating why they were losing so much to Amazon. And their premise coming in was that why would anybody pick Amazon? You can come to Google Shopping. They'd indexed everything on Amazon and the rest of the internet. It's clearly more comprehensive. Comprehensive should win. But what they kept hearing back from users was they value the consistency of the Amazon experience. They would say, I understand how the reviews work. I understand how the descriptions work. The pricing makes sense. I understand returns. I understand shipping. And I would prefer consistent over comprehensive. So when we started the offsite, I decided to start with a different question and said, instead of thinking about whether or not we should link out, we'll get to that later, let's ask a question, in 5 to 10 years, will the online video market be more about consistency or more about comprehensiveness? And this discussion turned out to be really fruitful. Everybody could have an open view of it, and we actually quite quickly got to a conclusion that the video market was likely to value consistency over comprehensiveness. And as a side note, I think that's actually how things played out. It's now 15 years after this conversation, and if you think about the online video market has totally exploded, and yet there is no one property that has all the video. Now, once we answered this question, every other question all of a sudden became much easier. It was really obvious. Of course, we're not going to link out. We value consistency. That would be an inconsistent experience. It also led to answering other questions. We decided to stop hosting third-party video embed players on YouTube. And probably one of the more consequential ones we did was we went and renegotiated with Apple to take back control of the YouTube iOS app, which is probably a story for a different day. But this whole process got named eigenquestions. So where's the name eigenquestion come from? Well, it comes from a math term, eigenvectors. Those of you that remember linear algebra, the eigenvector is the most discriminating vector in a multidimensional space. But if you don't know the math, it doesn't really matter. The name is totally made up. So eigenquestion is a question where, if answered, it likely answers the subsequent questions as well. So think about last time you had a list of questions to answer. How did you rank them? You'll naturally rank them by urgency or impact. In this method, you take that list of questions and you rank them by which one is likely to answer most of the other questions. Or another way to think about this is, instead of focusing on getting to the right answer, spend as much energy focusing on getting to the right question.
I love that. And so we talked about kind of ways to frame the meeting, whether it's a decision doc template or an eigenquestion. And the next step is actually getting the opinions in the room, right? And how do you get everyone's feedback? And there are a lot of rituals around this too. And one of my favorites is one that you actually do at Coda.
So is one of my favorite rituals. If you were to take a group of Coda employees on their first Friday and ask them for a golden ritual, just like Bing's test, they would almost certainly tell you about this thing we do called Dory and Pulse. And there's 2 steps. The first one is Dory. That's how we ask questions in a meeting. We don't blurt them out. We don't talk over each other. We add them to a table. We vote them up and down. We go through them in order. And then the second part is called Pulse. Pulse is how we get to a decision. So we ask everybody to write down their viewpoint, a score from 1 to 5, and a reason. And one of the things we do is we hide everybody else's responses until everyone's done answering to try to remove groupthink. So Dory and Pulse. Dory's named after the fish who asks all the questions. The very fun ritual, very effective. But why do employees talk about it on their first Friday? It's usually because they're reflecting something out of our culture. One of our values is great ideas can come from anywhere. And usually our employees will tell you a story. They'll say, oh yeah, I was in this meeting and I asked a question and I outvoted the CEO. Or they'll say, I was in this other meeting and I got to submit a Pulse feedback that actually got listened to and read in a way that didn't get talked over or ignored. It's one of our most iconic rituals.
And at Figma, we have our own version of Pulse. We have this alignment scale widget in FigJam. One of the things that we like to do is in a big meeting with FigJam, we have a bunch of questions on the file, and we copy paste this widget next to each one of them and have everyone put their faces along the scale. And one of the things that happens is that you really quickly see which questions are worth discussing where there's misalignment. So for example, in this real screenshot, Dylan and I are not aligned, and so it's probably worth talking about this and spending some time, right? So, it's really great to get all of this feedback from everyone, right? And it's nice to have an open culture like that. But the problem is it starts to look like this, right? It starts to get overwhelming. And I like to call this phenomenon swooping and pooping, this idea that people open your file, come in, drop a lot of comments, and then leave, right? And one of the things that leaves you with, as the creator of the file, you're just like, oh, I have to deal with all this feedback. Do I have to act on it? I got to respond to it and not ignore it, right? I like to just delete them secretly, but. And there are companies that have really amazing rituals around this. And so my favorite one is by HubSpot. And so they have this ritual called flash tags. And it's basically something like a hashtag that you append to your feedback or your comment. And so, for example, if I said, hey, maybe this should look a little bit more red or something like that, hashtag FYI, just an opinion that you can listen to, you don't have to act on it. However, if I said hashtag please change this color to red, then I would hope that the designer would actually change it to red. And what I really like about this is that it shows that not every piece of feedback has to be equal. It kind of discriminates between the feedback that's just casual and the ones that are really asking to be acted on. But my favorite part about this is the HubSpot team chose to describe these flash tags in a very specific way via what they call a hill dying status. So for example, for hashtag plea, they would say, hey, dying on a hill is not on my bucket list, but if it were, this would be a really good candidate, right? So I am going to die on this hill. But with hashtag FYI, I don't even see a hill. Hashtag suggestion, I saw the hill, but I don't want to commit the calories to actually climb the hill. Hashtag recommendation, I climbed the hill, I breathed deeply, I contemplated my life, and I came back down. Right? So this is a really fun way for people to express the urgency of the feedback and make sure that's really clear what they expect to be acted on.
All right, love that. So we framed a problem, we've collected a bunch of feedback, and it's time to make a decision. And one of the key things that teams struggle with is who's going to make the decision. So we talked a lot about roles and responsibilities, and Yuki is a great example to share.
So this next example is by Coinbase. Right? And so one of the things we talked about the Pulse ritual, and one of the misconceptions is that by polling the entire room, you actually have to be in a situation where majority rules, right? If 51% of the room has a negative sentiment, then you can't go forward with the idea. But that's not the case. And Coinbase has a cool ritual around this. So you'll hear about things like DRI, RACI, DAISY. Coinbase uses one called Rapid, and it just assigns roles to people. But the crucial thing is they actually organize the feedback by role so that you can make it really clear which feedback you want to act on and which feedback is maybe most important. And so I really like this because it makes it clear that it's not everyone's feedback that you have to pay attention to. I mean, you should, right? It's good to know that, but it's also important to understand everyone's role in the decision-making process.
So we love that Coinbase ritual. We actually changed our Pulse template at Coda to do almost exactly the same thing, but with one major difference, which is something we learned from another company, Pixar. So if you think about Pixar, since 1979, they've released 24 films. They've won 23 Academy Awards. And you might ask, what's the secret? How do they do so well? Is it some like really magical individual? Is it some unique piece of hardware or software they made? Or maybe it's like the food they serve in the cafeteria. But if you actually ask anyone from Pixar, they'll tell you about this ritual. They call it brain trust. And it's a pretty simple idea. If you're making a film at Pixar, you can call for a brain trust where you screen your meeting with a bunch of filmmakers from around the company that are really trusted. You all get together in one room. You make really special note of when do people laugh, when do they cry, for how long. And then afterwards, you have this really frank discussion about what happened. And it's a really amazing ritual and can be definitely used for making great films or products, so on. But the thing I took away from it was actually the name Brain Trust. Because one of the things I've really struggled with things like Rapid or RACI or DAISY is that they have an approver role. And I always find the approver role to be awkward because I feel like it disempowers the decider. And one of the things I love about Brain Trust is it makes it really clear the Brain Trust is not an approver. They're not actually allowed to make any decisions. In fact, the whole forum is optional. You don't have to go. And yet, the average film at Pixar goes through 8 Brain Trust reviews before they release. And so at Coda, we took that idea, we renamed our roles, and we took our approval role and named them Brain Trust. We wrote down a set of principles, things like add lift, not drag, and we sort of shifted the perception so that you don't dread going to those reviewers and those reviews. So I think feedback's a gift, and it's really important to help contextualize it like that.
All right, so just to recap, it's really important to have a dedicated forum for Catalyst meetings. There are a lot of rituals around framing a question, whether it's the eigenquestion or decision-making docs. There's a lot of rituals around feedback and making sure that the right voices are heard in a room. And there are a lot of rituals that make it clear what to do with that feedback in order to get to a decision.
All right, ready for the third set. So context meetings. Remember, context meetings are squares because they build on each other, and the test is, did we come away better and able to do our jobs? So when you picture a context meeting, you probably picture an all hands. That's the most classic one. And when you picture an all hands, you might picture a really iconic one from Google called TGIF. So every Friday, Google ran these, the founders, Larry and Sergey, ran a all hands meeting for TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. It was generally hosted in the largest cafe on campus. All employees came. All the new employees wore these funny hats. Those are the propeller hats there, called Nooglers. And they would start the meeting by Larry and Sergey reading out all the launches from the week and give commentary on each one. Sometimes there was a presentation afterwards, but always there was an open Q&A at the end of this meeting. Now, I think this format has been mimicked by so many companies now that we don't think it's that odd. But when I first got to Google, it felt crazy. The founders getting up every week for a full hour and answering any question for anybody in the company. And it made me think a little bit about what's the goal of a meeting like this. It's clearly not a Catalyst meeting. There's no decisions to be made here. It's clearly not a Cadence meeting. It's not really an accountability forum. It's not a way to track progress or anything like that. And it's an incredibly expensive meeting. It's the entire company for an hour a week, and not including all the time that goes into preparing for the meeting. So why bother? So if you were to take a Googler coming out of this meeting and ask them what they got out of it, they would tell you that they got context. They can all go read the launch announcements themselves, but hearing Larry and Sergey go through them helped them contextualize where each thing fit in the big picture of what they're trying to accomplish as a company. Or the open Q&A gave them a chance to ask that burning question that unblocked them to be able to make progress for the rest of the week. It literally gave them the squares of context that they could then go build their own work on.
So that was all hands and building context around what the company is doing. But there's another kind of context meeting, which is building context around the people you're working with and building those relationships. So I'm sure you all know the Golden State Warriors. and they're an amazing team, and they're a particularly teamwork-oriented team as well. And when you ask Coach Steve Kerr what's the secret behind their success, it's not necessarily their practices. It's actually one small ritual. And they have a pretty unique ritual, which is dinners on the road. So most teams, when you go to another city to play, the first thing that happens is everyone disperses. They go and meet their friends or their relatives in that city. But the Warriors were unique in that they actually rented a room in a local restaurant and had team dinner together and build relationships and camaraderie. And for a long time, they're one of the only teams in the NBA to do this, which is really surprising. And so teams often deprioritize these kinds of context meetings because you're not getting a decision made or you're not holding goals accountable. But the Warriors show that you can't underestimate this kind of meeting. Another one I really like is from Disney. And Disney, it's funny, they don't refer to their employees as employees, they refer to them as characters. And yeah, they have this new hire onboarding program called Traditions, and one of the traditions is actually to spend a day in the park. And you're gonna play a role, doesn't matter what it is. It could be a Disney princess, another character, or even someone who picks up the trash, but everyone has a role. And the idea is to ingrain that idea, right? And that you're all there to entertain the guests. And those are some very Disney values that are really cemented from the early days because of this onboarding ritual.
All right, this is another one of my favorites. This is from Square. And it's actually started by Jenny Amick, who's a design lead at Square. And it's how she recrafted their one-on-ones. So the story is she kept getting complaints from designers who said they didn't get meaningful career feedback outside of the promotion review cycle. And Jenny's view was that that's an objectively terrible way to give career feedback. It's a super high pressure situation, and doing it only twice a year is a pretty crappy way to actually coach someone through their career. So she decided to go take a look at a different way to address this problem, and she went looking at their one-on-ones. Basically, every designer had a standing one-on-one with their boss, and in most cases, there was a document that went with it. She called these the Forever Scroll Google Docs. So they look like this: date, notes, date, notes, date, notes, and it was about 60 pages long. And somewhere in the middle of that, if you looked hard, you could find some meaningful career feedback. But it was super easy to forget it and really easy to miss it. And so she ended up redoing this with a new template. And in this case, she used Coda for it, and she turned it into pages. And she created distinct areas for every part of what she thought should happen in a one-on-one. The meeting notes, but also peer reviews, a thing they do called hype, and a distinct area for career development, where they would ensure that people actually spent the time to have that conversation on a regular basis. Now, Ritual was really effective. It's a very simple change, spread like wildfire through Square. There's now hundreds of other companies that have copied it as well. And I adopted the Ritual, and I've changed all my one-on-ones this way as well. And there's a couple things I really love about it. So the first one is that many people misunderstand one-on-one meetings to be something other than a context meeting. They think they're there to unblock decisions or to check in on progress. But in my view, a one-on-one is a classic context meeting. The real goal is to help this person perform better at their job, give them context, give them skills, help them do better in whatever you're trying to accomplish as a team. But the other thing I love about this ritual is the page at the top, the partnership agreement. So she put this at the top of every one-on-one doc, and it's where the employee and the manager are supposed to jointly write their expectations for each other and form their own agreement. And I think about this kind of as a meta ritual. It says that every employee-manager pair is actually different, and they should go craft their own unique ritual. All right, so those are context meetings. Pretty broad range, all hands to one-on-ones. I think the main thing I'd want you to take away is that this category is super easy to dismiss. People will think of these meetings as expensive or unnecessary. They'll replace them with the context meetings and the cadence meetings. And I think that mistake comes from misunderstanding the goal. The goal is to enable people to do better at their job, give them those building blocks. So you could have the perfect catalyst structure, but if you could instead give people better context, maybe they just make better decisions on their own. So as you think about the role of context meetings, don't underestimate how much impact they can have.
All right, so that brings us to our end of our talk. We talked about a bunch of different rituals, cadence meetings that are less boring, more efficient, more human, catalyst meetings, rituals that help with framing, feedback, and helping to identify who makes a decision, context meetings, rituals that find creative ways to give people context about the company, about each other, the values. And I think that in each of these cases, I would hypothesize that the creator of the ritual actually identified a particular problem or opportunity and thought creatively about a solution. You needed to motivate different behavior, you needed to incentivize ways of working, and it sounds like exactly how you would design a product. So I really think that all of you here are actually going to be amazing at designing your own rituals.
Okay, so as you design your rituals, you'll probably turn to tools like Coda and FigJam. And so we actually have one more thing to share with you. Our teams have been working together on a new integration between Figma and Coda. And it allows you to not have to choose. So you can go find out more about this downstairs. You can now take a FigJam and install the plugin and sync it directly into a table. So you can bidirectionally edit, see reactions in both places and so on. And you can embed a FigJam or a Figma as a full page in a Coda doc. So you can have one team hub for your whole team to be able to do everything from brainstorming to writing specs to doing designs to tracking tasks all in one place. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So if you enjoyed this talk, there's some fun behind the scenes of how we use Coda and Figma to actually build this talk. We really geeked out on that. There are these slides on the Figma community that I published. So if you want to remix them or share us stories about your own rituals, would love to see them.
And then if you want to contribute to the book or just want an early read, rituals.shashir.io has got a nice place to be able to see all of that as well. And that's it.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.